Welcome to Dey Weekly, episode 13. I'm your host, Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. Of course, I'll provide a quick recap from the Cincinnati Bengals game versus the Steelers. And then all you fantasy football nuts that are still in the playoffs or getting ready to go in the playoffs, I'll cover the top 5 fantasy point getters from this week, from week 13. Now to week 13 versus the Steelers. The Cincinnati Bengals played against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday. It was a high-scoring game that ended with a 44-38 victory for the Steelers. Russell Wilson had a standout performance from the Steelers, throwing for 414 yards and 3 touchdowns. He completed 29 of 38 passes and led Pittsburgh to a victory. Joe Burrow continued his strong season, throwing for 309 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had a career milestone, throwing his 125th career touchdown pass. Cam Taylor-Britt scored a pick 6 for the Bengals, returning an interception for 51 yards for a touchdown. That's when I thought the game was going to turn around, and it sure in hell didn't. The game featured several lead changes and was tied at 21-21 at halftime. Najee Harris and Chris Boswell contributed significantly for the Steelers, with Harris scoring a 10-yard touchdown run and Boswell kicking 2 field goals. The Bengals defense struggled, of course. We made Russell Wilson look like an MVP out there, allowing 44 points for the 3rd consecutive game. It was a tough loss for the Cincinnati Bengals, who fell to 4-8 on the season. The Steelers improved to 9-3 and showed resilience in overcoming the Bengals' strong offensive performance. Now, I just want to kind of add a little bit of something, just so if you guys did not know. Zach Taylor is 52-1 in his career with the Cincinnati Bengals as a head coach. That being said, we've made the playoffs twice, lost the Super Bowl, lost an AFC championship game. Cincinnati Bengals, their offense has been, pretty dang good since Joe Burrow is back and healthy. We ranked 9th overall in offensive yards, 5th in points, but we're still 4-8. Now let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Old Lou. When Zach Taylor took over, we were 25th in 2019 in defense, 22nd and these are points, by the way, for 2020. In 2021, we were 17th in points for defense. In 2022, of course, the best season that we had at defense was ranked 6th. Last year in points, we were ranked 21st, and this year we're ranked 31st in points. Something need to change? I say yes. I didn't have my roaring reactions on Sunday because I had some stuff come up. But my roaring reaction is I predicted on Pump Your Brakes that the Cincinnati Bengals would lose because I have zero faith in the defense. And we would make Russell Wilson look like an MVP quarterback out there, going for 400 yards and just whooping our butt. It's like, when is the insanity going to stop with the Cincinnati Bengals defense? Joe Burrow has to be near perfect. Let's put it this way. Joe Burrow has to be perfect every single stinking game. Does not matter. Every single game. And if we have a turnover, we can't. I'm sorry, I had to lower my sound here, my music. But if we have Joe Burrow turns over the ball, or we'll say Chase Brown fumbles the ball, or we just have a turnover on offense, we can't depend on our defense to get the ball back or to make a stop. I don't know how many times that we've been watching, and this is like it's a carousel. It's going around and around and around. We've been seeing the same stinking defense all year long. First, I know a lot of the media wants to blame Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's to blame, but Joe Burrow's not to blame because he's been playing great football. He's having a MVP year, but unfortunately he won't win the MVP because we're 4-8. My prediction is we are going to end up going 7-10 is what my prediction is. I predicted that, I know there was a questionnaire out there that asked What did we think we would go for these last 6 games? And I said 3-3, which puts us at 7-10. Unfortunately for us, it's not. We have the offense, we have no defense. Is it the defensive coordinator's problem? Is it Zach Taylor's problem? Is it the general manager's problem? Dick Tobin, the front office, Mike Brown, not wanting to spend money. We had a chance to get Xavier Howard. I have not seen anything that has came out of why Xavier Howard didn't take our deal. But we would have. I think we would have. It would have been a positive point for us if we would have got him, or a veteran cornerback. Like I've said over and over again, we need a lockdown, shutdown corner out there, and then we need a dog on that defensive line. A dog, because Trey Hendrickson is honestly the only defender in the whole Cincinnati Bengals team. We did a comparison a couple weeks ago of all of our defense, who would make it on like the Ravens team or the Steelers team. I think we all said Trey Hendrickson was the only one that we could really come up to. Mike Hilton, he might be able to come in there for slot, of course. So that's just been our wonderful, wonderful season so far. 4-8, lost to the Steelers again, made Russ look like a MVP. That being said, I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and then I will go over the fantasy football with you guys. Be right back. And welcome back to Running Through the Jungle. Again, I'm your host, Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. Did I say Running Through the Jungle? Sorry, Dey Weekly. Welcome back to Dey Weekly with your host, Tim Lyons. I'm going to go over the top 5 fantasy football, or I always screw that up. The top 5 fantasy football point getters for the week. And then I'll also do the NFL fantasy football's perfect lineup and the I'm not so perfect lineup. But I'm going to go, I'm going to go over them first. Let's go over them first. And say hi if you guys are watching. For the perfect lineup this week, Winston for the Cleveland Browns had 32.98 points. Bucky Irvin for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had 27.5 points. Bijan Robinson, 25.5 points. Judy from the Cleveland Browns had 40.5 points against his ex-team, the Broncos. Scary Terry McLaurin from the Washington Commanders had 27.3 points. Brock Bowers, there he is again. I swear every week I'm saying Brock Bowers' name. Every week I'm saying his name. 30.2 points. If you're running a flex with Njoku from the Cleveland Browns, a tight end, he had 26.2 points. And of course, Boswell, I've been saying his name for, this is episode 13. So for 13 weeks, Chris Boswell, 16 points. And then the Denver Broncos defense had 20 points themselves. And if you had that perfect lineup, you had 246.18 points. You absolutely destroyed that week. You sent whoever in the fantasy football playoffs home crying. They were whimpering. Now to the I'm not so perfect lineup. Kirk Cousins, Atlanta Falcons. Oh my gosh, 2.10 points. Spears from the Tennessee Titans, the running back, had 0.3 points. Chuba Hubbard from the Carolina Panthers had 2.3 points. Robinson, I don't know who W. Robinson is from the New York Giants. Not familiar with him. Anyways, he only had 2.6 points. Quentin Johnston from the Los Angeles Chargers. Wow, he only had 3.2 points. Kyle Pitts had 0 points. Devin Singletary for the New York Giants had 2.3 points. Sanders for the Miami Dolphins, the kicker, had 3 points. And the 49ers, -4 points. If you had this I'm not so perfect lineup, you only had 11.80 points and you were eliminated for the playoffs. Have a good day. Now to the fantasy football top 5 point getters, starting at quarterback. Jameis Winston versus Denver had 497 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, which we know Jameis Winston's good for. Had 11 rushing yards and had 1 2-point conversion for 32.98 points. Josh Allen versus San Francisco had 148 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Ran for 18 yards and 1 touchdown. He had a reception for 7 yards and a touchdown for 28.42 points. That's funny that they gave that to him because he threw it, then it was back to him. Okay. He had 28.42 points. Jaden Daniels, rookie out of Washington versus Tennessee, had 206 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 34 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown for 27.64 points. Old Russell Wilson, the Cincinnati Bengals, made this guy look like a superstar versus Cincinnati. 414 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 3 rushing yards for 26.86 points. Caleb Williams, wow, I think it's the first time I'm saying his name on fantasy football. Number 5 versus Detroit. 256 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, 39 rushing yards for 26.14 points, and they still got the L. All right, now to the running backs, the Bell Cows. Bucky Irvin versus Carolina had 152 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, 3 receptions for 33 yards for 27.50 points. Bijan Robinson from versus the Los Angeles Chargers, had 102 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, 6 receptions for 33 yards for 25.50 points. Najee Harris versus Cincinnati had 75 rushing yards and a touchdown, 6 receptions and 54 yards for 24.90 fantasy points. Our old Joe Mixon versus Jacksonville had 101 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, 4 receptions for 18 yards for 21.90 points. Josh Jacobs versus Miami had 43 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, 4 receptions for 74 yards, and had 21.70 points. Now to the wide receivers. As I said, Jerry Jeudy, 9 receptions, 235 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 1 2-point conversion. He had 40.50 points. Scary Terry McLaurin versus Tennessee had 8 receptions, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns for 27.30 points. Mike Evans, the veteran, versus Carolina, had 8 receptions, 118 yards receiving, 1 touchdown for 25.80 points. At number 4, Keenan Allen versus Detroit had 5 receptions, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 24.30 points. And Parker Washington versus Houston had 6 receptions, 103 yards, and 1 touchdown, and had a 2-point conversion, had 24.30 points. Now to your tight ends. Of course, it's going to be the rookie Brock Bowers at number 1 versus Kansas City at 2 rushing yards. He had 10 receptions for 140 yards and 1 touchdown for 30.20 points. I really wish Bengals got him, but oh well. It happens. David Njoku versus Denver had 9 receptions for 52 yards and 2 touchdowns for 26.20 points. Trey McBride versus the Minnesota Vikings had 12 receptions for 96 yards for 21.60 points. Jonnu Smith versus Green Bay had 10 receptions, 113 yards for 21.30 points. And Mark Andrews versus Philadelphia had 2 rushing yards. He had 6 receptions for 67 yards and 1 touchdown for 18.90 points. Now to the kickers. At number 1, of course, Chris Boswell versus Cincinnati had 5 PATs. He made 3 field goals, 1 for 50-plus yards for 16 points. Chase McLaughlin versus Carolina had 2 PATs and 4 field goals, 1 for 50-plus yards for 16 points. Chad Ryland versus Minnesota had 1 PAT. He had 5 field goals for 16 points. Fairbairn, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name because I'll screw it up every time, versus Jacksonville had 2 PATs and 3 field goals for 13 yards. And John Parker Romo versus Arizona out of the Vikings had 2 PATs and 3 field goals, 150-plus yards for 13 points. Now to the defense. The Denver Broncos at number 1 versus Cleveland had 3 sacks and 3 interceptions. They scored two touchdowns, allowed 32 points, and had 20 total fantasy points. Los Angeles Chargers versus Atlanta had a sack, 4 interceptions, scored a touchdown, only allowed 13 points, and had 19 fantasy points. At number 3, the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Giants, 6 sacks, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, scored a touchdown, only allowed 20 points for 17 fantasy points. And then number 4, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus Cincinnati had 4 sacks and an interception, 2 fumble recoveries, and scored a touchdown. Allowed 32 points for 15 fantasy points. And then the New York Jets, Jets versus the Seahawks had 3 sacks and 2 fumble recoveries. Returned a kick for a touchdown, allowed 20 points, and had 14 fantasy points. Now that will do for the Dey Weekly. Thank you guys so much for watching, for listening. Make sure you remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Also, make sure I didn't plug this in here like I usually do. But you want to hear our reactions to the games? Come listen to us on YouTube or on all your favorite podcast platforms weekly. And also join us on Wednesdays for our Running Through the Jungle predictions. Sometimes you'll also catch a crossover with Strange Love, or like last week we were on Pump Your Brakes with the Steelers crew. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Have a great week. You guys take care, and Dey.